One of the things I've observed over the last 6 to 18 months in the political space has been that one of the topics that gets the biggest rise out of right wing crowds, and by this I'm talking about your typical Trump rally, as well as
Hmm.
CPAC in Texas over the summer, what got the
Hmm.
crowd the most excited was stuff about gender and trans people. One of the
Hmm.
biggest applause lines at CPAC over the summer was when Ted Cruz said, "My pronouns are kiss my ass," and the crowd went absolutely crazy. One of the
Hmm.
biggest applause lines during the Trump rally is when Trump talks about a trans woman in a weightlifting competition easily lifting hundreds of pounds more than everybody else, and just how we got to get men out of women's sports, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
Do you make anything, or what do you make of the fact that those stories have become so titillating to a large portion of the country?
Well, when everything is when everything is a nail, all you have or is what looks like a cultural war, and that is we don't want to talk about income inequality, we don't want to talk about inflation or growing the economy. So let's get people emotionally triggered by a small number of uh, instances. The governor of South Dakota spends precious resources and time trying to pass a law that protects women's sports from transgender athletes. And by the way, conceptually, it's a conversation worth having. I don't think a 6'5" person born as a male who's had testosterone pour over their muscle and bone structure should be competing in what had traditionally been a woman's swim meet. I think that's an honest conversation we should have. But when you have the governor of a state passing laws to quote unquote protect girls' sports, and then we find there isn't a single instance in the entire state of a person who has tried to be compete as a woman who was born a male, you have to say, well, are they interested in an honest conversation, or are they just interested in triggering people and leading us down a path of demonstrating hate towards a community that has been subject to just so much bullshit? It's just, I mean, at the end of the day, the far right claims to embrace Jesus. We're supposed to be loving people. We're supposed to be accepting of them. We're supposed to be, and they also, one of the things I love about GOP principles is in really tough issues, you defer to the individual. Why wouldn't we let families and doctors figure out what is or isn't the right thing about this? We end up in a statewide swim meet, okay, let's have the conversation. But we're talking about it's a similar conversation where they say, well, Democrats want you to be able to abort your baby, the week before your water breaks. That doesn't happen. It's a theoretical situation meant to trigger people emotionally and divide us. It's not productive. It's rooted in hate. It's rooted in cheap politics, and it doesn't advance us forward. One of the things from my book, as a segue to the book, looking at all the issues that plague us, David, whether it's income inequality, whether it's the very serious issues around climate change, whether it's our polarization. If America's problems were a horror movie, it would be the call is coming from inside of the house. Instead of taking time to focus on how we establish more chips to ensure that we're not relying on the Chinese during a conflict, instead of focusing on how we ensure that we bring up our bottom fifth of education level, that we get 1 out of 5 households out of poverty that have children, we start talking about this bullshit. And we start talking, and when I say bullshit, I mean anything that divides us. 34% of Democrats, I'm sorry, 54% of Democrats are worried the kid's going to marry a Republican. A third of people in each party think people in the other party are their mortal enemy. Americans will never have greater allies than other Americans. And I find the far right, especially, but also the far left, are more interested in embarrassing the other side than they are about advancing the nation. And we have to get back to a point where we recognize first and foremost we're Americans. We're not Republicans and Democrats. I'm a huge World War II history buff. I have this great photo of these men wading into the water as the front gate slammed down on their landing craft heading towards Omaha Beach in the invasion of Normandy. 2 out of 3 of these men, average age 26, wouldn't leave the beach alive. And I imagine that they can suspend the time space continuum, see our problems, and go, you can't fix that. I can't imagine any of those men looked at each other and even knew who was a Republican or a
Mm.
Democrat. So we are energy independent, we are food independent, we have eradicated diseases, we are more prosperous than any nation in the world, but we've decided we don't like each other. And when you take very tiny examples of trans athletes that are meant to evoke an emotional response, all you are doing is saying, I want Americans to hate each other. I don't want America to move forward. I want Americans to hate each other. We should have an honest conversation. Parents who want to have an honest conversation around gender affirmation and be informed when a kid under the age of 18 asks for hormone therapy at a school, that's an honest conversation. We should have that conversation. But according to Republican principles, we should have it at the school and the family level. And to be blunt, this is really an edge case. And they want to turn it into a cultural issue because they don't want to really talk about what ails us. So it's like, come on, let's get back to where we were as Americans, have more respect for the individual, and stop using edge cases to trigger people such that we're angry at each other. It's totally unproductive.